Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're dialing in from. And welcome to today's webinar titled Privacy First, is Mobile Advertising Ready? Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's webinar. You will have the opportunity to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar by typing your questions into the pane of the control panel. We will collect these and address them right at the end of the webinar. Now, to kick it off, today we have Xiaofeng Wang, Principal Analyst at Forrester, who will be sharing how data and identity deprecation impacts APAC's mobile advertisers, and will be unveiling a bunch of findings from our custom study conducted by Forrester Consulting on the future of mobile advertising in tackling data and identity deprecation. After that, I will be joined by Rishi Bedi, the Managing Director of APAC at InMobi, who will be basically in a fireside chat with me about the study's findings and also how decision makers are navigating this new landscape, especially in partnership with InMobi. We trust the insights shared today will be helpful to you. So please sit back and enjoy this webinar.
My name is Xiaofeng Wang. I'm Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. I'm based in Singapore. Today, I'm going to share the new research Forrester worked with InMobi. The name is Future of Mobile Advertising in Tackling Data and Identity Deprecation. So before I start with the actual paper we did, I'm going to show you some trends, both from the marketer side and the consumer side. So from the marketer side, we found the future of mobile advertising is promising because 64% of marketers in Asia Pacific said that they will increase their mobile marketing investment in 2022. So that's from a survey that Forrester did every single year to track the continued trends in the market. And then we also found mobile advertising is actually very challenging for marketers in the region because they face further data deprecation challenges in addition to the death of third-party cookies. So that because of the death of third-party cookies and also the reduce of the pool of ad IDs, that would affect their targeting efficiency and also affect how they can accurately measure the advertising results. So they are bearing such challenges. And from consumer side, Forrester also found that values-driven consumers are growing across the world, in Asia Pacific as well. They already make their purchase decisions based on values they believe in, and including consumer data privacy. So across Asia Pacific, in markets like Australia, India, and Singapore, consumers consider companies' commitment to consumer data privacy as one of the top 3 values they are using to make their purchase decisions. In other words, consumers will choose to build long-term relationship with brands that respect their consumer data privacy. So with that in the background, Forrester and InMobi launched this new Snapshot Opportunity, Future of Mobile Advertising in Tackling Data and Identity Deprecation. So in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to show you the key findings from this new research. So we asked marketers in the region across organizations, from agencies to advertisers to publishers, and ask them why they would like to adopt consumer data privacy practices. And we found 3 key drivers. The first one, as mentioned, because consumers become more and more privacy conscious, and then they request or they ask for consumer data privacy from brands they want to build a relationship with. Therefore, they will vote with their wallet and make their purchase decisions. So rising consumer privacy awareness as a top driver for brands and other marketing organizations to adopt consumer data privacy practices. 81% of the marketing decision makers said so. And the second close one is more stringent data privacy regulations. We see that across all markets in Asia Pacific, either emerging markets, they didn't have a consumer data privacy law, they launched it, or they already have one and then they make it more actionable, more granular. And that's the whole trend across Asia Pacific. And that's why marketers now they felt the urgency to adopt consumer data privacy practices. But that's not just because of compliance and regulation. That's also because they know consumer data privacy will make a difference, can differentiate with their competitors. So they also felt the urgency, they felt the peer pressure. They want to catch up with their competitors. For some of them, they already lead in the consumer data privacy practices. So every marketing organization, they want to catch up in this consumer data privacy game. Of course, it's not an easy thing to do, and marketers, they felt a lot of concerns. And the key challenge is they felt phasing out of advertising identity, they will cause some negative impacts. So 61% of marketers, they are concerned, and their top 5 concerns on phasing out of advertising identity include data availability and the quality, because they know they have limited data they can use now. Consumers are more concerned to share their data, and partners, they have more strict regulations and the rules to share those data as well. And without the third-party cookies or advertising identity, they are not sure about the quality of data, especially when they want to stitch insights from different touch points, channels, and from different publishers. So effectiveness of consumer reach and frequency, right? Because the limitation of the data that would affect the reach and the frequency if you basically invest the same amount of advertising. And then they might cause additional cost of investment because of the, in order to reach the same level of reach and the frequency with the limitation of data, advertisers, they tend to spend more advertising. And then rising cost of ad space, and for publishers, because data is harder to acquire, the cost for them to provide the same level of services to their advertisers or provide the same level of audiences, they have to invest more. And then, which means the rising cost of ad space, and there will be less inexpensive options available. So that also concerns marketing decision makers. And the last one in the top 5 is ability of targeting and personalization. Without a plenty of data and a good quality of data, they are concerned about ability of targeting when they invest in advertising. And also when consumers are cautious about sharing their personal information, which makes personalization a lot harder. It's not just about technology. Technology today can make a very granular personalization possible, but it's always up to consumers how comfortable they are to share their data with brands. So that's why it's very important to invest in consumer data practices to earn long-term trust and a relationship with customers, with your consumers, so they are more comfortable to share their personal information, to exchange value with you. And in terms of the current state of companies in this data privacy practices journey, we found they are at different levels of maturity. So the level 1 is they are still in this learning and planning stage. They are identifying privacy's impact on ad strategy and planning necessary steps internally. And the next level is executive governance structures, which means they have identified and implemented core teams internally to manage and execute on strategic changes. So it's company level, enterprise level efforts, and they are actually execute important steps. It's not just figuring things out. The third level is expanding and optimization. For those companies, they already have well-established cookieless and privacy-first practices in place, and they start to measure the effectiveness and the outcome of those practices. So when we look at marketing organizations in the region, and when we check different types of the organizations, we found they are at different levels of maturity as well. And so across brands, also advertisers, media agencies, and publishers or media owners, we found publishers or media owners, they have the highest level of maturity, 46%, nearly half of the publishers we surveyed, they are in this highest level, expanding and optimization. So the reason is a lot of publishers, they already adopted subscription-based business model, which means their readers, they have to opt in, and so they know they can recognize their customers, their readers. Therefore, so they use a lot of first-party data, so they felt they're more confident. So they rely less on third-party cookies or mobile advertising IDs. So that's why publishers, they are more confident compared to media agencies and advertisers. Advertisers are in the most vulnerable position because they have the largest percentage. They're still in the very immature stage. They are still learning and planning. They hope they can get more help from their partners, such as agencies and publishers. And we know companies, they are at different maturity levels. They actually face different challenges when implementing robust data privacy practices. And so for companies, they are still at learning and planning stage. Their top challenge, top concern, 53% said the lack of ecosystem partners to implement for their organization's use cases, because they are so new to this data privacy practices, they don't know what to do. So they rely on the help of their ecosystem partners. And moving on to the second stage, executive governance structures. So it's mainly about building the internal team, operating processes to make it happen. So the top challenge for companies at this level, 48%, nearly half said building a culture that values privacy is their top concern. They want to educate their internal employees or departments to onboard on this data privacy practices journey and build a company-wide culture to do that, to realize data privacy practices. And for companies are at the third stage of their data privacy practices journey, expanding and optimization, their top concern is how to deal with very wide privacy regulatory frameworks across Asia Pacific. That's very different from their peers in the US or in Europe. They have very consistent data regulations such as GDPR, and once they figure out how to do that, and it's all set. But for marketers in the region in Asia Pacific, especially they are regional marketers, they are handling multiple markets in Asia Pacific. They have different levels of maturity in terms of data regulations, and consumers, they have different levels of consciousness and awareness in sharing their data to brands. And also regulatory frameworks are different. Each country has their own data regulations. And and the requirements are also different. So that adds to the complexity and for marketing organization. So they need to do that to understand the differences, the variety, and then they can implement their data privacy practices well. So what companies are currently doing, they are seeking various approaches to mitigate the negative impact of advertising identity deprecation. So we found that 90% of the marketing decision makers in the region, they are already testing more context-based advertising rather than relying too much on the third-party cookies or advertising IDs. 88% said they have increased digital ad spending to compensate the less efficiency of their data advertising when they have limited data to access or when the ad space becomes more costly. And then 82% said they have onboarded at least one ad tech vendor to adhere to identity policy requirements. As mentioned, when companies are not so mature in terms of this consumer data privacy practices, they rely on partners' help. So they want to ask for ad tech vendors or agencies or sometimes MarTech vendors to help them to onboard this journey. And 76% of the marketers said they have invested in more first-party data collection and how to use it better. So in order to realize the mitigation of the impact of data and third-party cookie ID deprecations, marketing organizations, they are investing in tools and alternative targeting approaches to weather the changes. So top data onboarders, marketers, they want to invest, include cross-walled garden data management, because without third-party cookies and ad IDs, cross-walled garden tracking, it's a lot more difficult to do. So they want to they want to invest in such data services, and if there are partners, there are tools can help them do that, they want to invest in that. And customer data management platforms. So that's basically CDP that helps brands to manage their first party and leverage, make the best of their first party data. Identity resolution is one of the top tools they want to invest, because that will help marketers to form this single view of customers across channels, touch points, and devices. And also they want to invest more in first party data collection. And alternative targeting approaches are among the top areas that organizations want to invest, including acquire more consented third-party data, alternative data sources to build and segment targeted audiences, and algorithmic targeting and rules-based targeting. So we'll make marketers to achieve their marketing goals, targeting goals without relying too much on ad identities and third-party cookies. So, but in conclusion, what should marketers do, right? They should up their first-party data game, because without third-party cookies and also ad identities, first-party data is the most reliable data you can use, and also first-party data means the trust you can get from your customers. So you need to have a communication strategy with your customers about the data value exchange, and so they are more comfortable to share first-party data with you. And the second one, rethink identity and adopt alternative targeting methods. So in the previous slide, we showed a list of the alternative targeting methods, and we see leading organizations are already investing or plan to invest in the next 12 months. So that's really the future of mobile advertising, and you need to recognize that and start to invest today. And the last but not least, it's really about your internal work process. Embed privacy by design principles to your marketing approach. It's not just about marketing campaigns, or it's about your like a creative, your product design, everything from end to end. You need to embrace this privacy by design principles and also invest in this privacy culture internally. And we also see some organizations, they already assigned chief privacy officer to help manage the entire customer data privacy much better. So there are a lot of things you can do, and today is just the beginning. And we are sharing this research with InMobi along with you. Hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Hello, welcome Rishi. Welcome to our very first identity-based webinar in APAC. So lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you. And hi, everybody, whoever has joined us for this webinar. Great to have you on the call.
Awesome. So we're here to actually, do a detailed discussion around what InMobi has specifically been doing and also correlated to a bunch of findings that we're actually seeing in the market. Now, the first thing to kick it off, right? You hear APAC and you actually see diversity, right? Like from India to ANZ, it's as diverse as it gets. Now, therein, what do you think is basically, like the impact of things like GDPR, etc.? I mean, these rules haven't yet come to APAC, but what do you think are the impact of GDPR, ATT, etc. on the actual consumer mindset within APAC?
Sure, Rajesh, that's a great question. Look, while those regulations haven't come to the APAC region, but for all purposes, we are a connected world, right? We are a global organization. So everything that happens in the European or Western world has some sort of an impact on APAC markets also, because the advertiser ecosystem, the publisher ecosystem is all global in many ways, right? So the impact is obviously the on the iOS side, on the ATT framework, which was released by Apple, that has seen a huge impact on the consumers in the market. So most of the consumers now, because they were also asked by the Apple to for the opt-in,
Explicit opt-ins, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, the consumers feel a lot more secure about the data. They feel okay, the data is secured, it's safe. They're being asked why this data is required to be shared. And generally, I think there's a sentiment that, okay, the industry is evolved and our data is being held in a far better or treated in a far more secure manner, and their privacy is requested. So we're seeing that happening. I also want to take it forward a little bit. I think we've seen that the opt-in rates are much more higher by consumers. So it's not that consumers feel they want to restrict their data, because they want advertising, they want to be shown relevant advertising for their on their phones. So we see opt-in rates are much higher, which means that, hey, consumers, while they are concerned about their privacy and their data, but they also want to see very relevant ads. So there is that sentiment, and I think we're seeing very healthy trends in that.
Great. So there's a follow-up thought, right, that I had based on this, which is once ATT was enforced, there is a bunch of advertising that Apple themselves have been doing. Of course, they're building their own ads business in the meanwhile, but their theme of privacy, that's iPhone, seems to have stretched it a bit, right? I think there is a bunch of context missing on that front, wherein basically they are just saying that consumers are not ready to share data, but what are you seeing out here in APAC in terms of that, right?
Yeah, I think I agree. The advertising was a little on the extreme side. What we're seeing is that the consumers, as long as consumers know that why they need to share their data, they're being explicitly asked, and they realize that there is a value exchange. In return, they're getting in turn some benefits. I think consumers are very, very open with sharing or opting in to share their information. It's very simple as you go to a website or a news website and you go through content, and now you're being asked for your email ID to register, right? So that the website can share with you more relevant content or news or articles that are relevant to you based on what you have browsed or searched for. And consumers are very happy to share that because they know that, hey, in return, I'm going to get a lot of content and also relevant content eventually. So we're seeing that definitely. So I agree. Uh, Consumers have reacted a lot more differently than what the initial advertising by the iOS devices was being, was messaging.
So true, so true. And like, I mean, at least to me specifically, like, in India, we basically are thriving on, ads, and we are basically actually more than happy to share our email ID in return for that amount of news, that kind of a, exclusive kind of access to some of the content, right? So we do definitely understand the idea of data value exchange. Now, quickly, just taking a step into the advertising world, the ad tech world.
Mhm.
While consumers are very basically, fundamentally understanding the idea of data value exchange, how have advertisers actually responded or reacted to the entire ATT enforcement and some of these changes that are more impending than in the future?
Yeah. Hey, so obviously, advertisers, the level of awareness around this ability or inability, depending on what are the rates in every market. The level of awareness with advertisers in order to solve for that, or that, hey, we need to still, figure out ways to identify the audiences, target them, measure some sort of efficacy, or attribute some sort of campaign objective or outcomes. I think that is very, very high. We are also seeing the scan adoption rates with the performance based advertisers are very high, which is good.
Mm.
Now, of course, there are still challenges to be solved. And I can tell you a little bit about how InMobi is working with some of these advertisers to solve for that. So we've launched our own curated marketplaces proposition and offering to advertisers instead of going after very specific IDFA based, which is now missing, identifier based audiences.
Mhm.
They're able to target very niche curated marketplaces, depending on what their objective is, what kind of vertical they belong to. So we've got that. In addition to that, we've got also a bunch of first-party data partnerships in our region, especially in APAC. We have announced last year a partnership with Gojek, which is an exclusive audience partnership. This year we've announced with Telkomsel. In other regions, also in Australia, in Korea, we've got other partnerships with different partners. So our intent is to continue staying ahead of the market or the industry and trying to address some of these challenges with advertisers. We work very closely with both the advertiser ecosystem and some of these data partners to overcome the challenges they were facing initially. So yeah, there's a lot of work going on, and advertisers have responded very, very well to preparing for some of these new issues that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're way ahead of Google Topics at this point in time. The cohorts are like actually there, and especially with super apps like Gojek and as wide a reach as Telkomsel, which is 95% of the smartphone populace in Indonesia. I think it seems like you've kind of got a bunch of verticals and audience segments covered with that. Seems very, very amazing to hear that actually.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Nice. Now, shifting gears and looking at the other side of the equation, you did touch upon this about it being, a global connected world and also publishers being a lot more global, both on the gaming and non-gaming side. Now, what have you seen when it comes to publishers doing to tackle this challenge, and how is actually InMobi helping them on this front?
Sure. So publishers were facing a very different kind of challenge, right? Ever since initially GDPR rules came in, about 5, 6 years ago, and then now we have ATT framework, and there are changes expected on the Google side as well. So everybody is aware of those inputs that are coming from Google. Now, publishers are having to deal with a very different kind of problem, and the problem is the industry is seeing new demand side identifiers or identity graph providers or identity solution providers. Now, if the publishers want to maximize their revenue, yield, or business, they need to work with tons of different players. I think last we checked, I think there were more than 70 or 80 different identity solution providers already, and we still like just a couple of years into the uh, challenge that we are trying to solve. So it's impossible for publishers to work with each of these demand side advertisers, right? So what we publishers are doing, in fact, what InMobi has been able to do with them.
Mhm.
So we've got a unique solution. We call it Unified, and it is an industry first publisher side identity solution or resolution. What it does is it allows publishers to work with multiple demand side identifiers, right? And they don't have to they don't have to integrate with 6 or 7 or 10 different pairs to maximize their addressability. They could work with the unified solution. And then once they do that, this SDK or software-based solution is integrated on the with LiveRamp, ID5, Epsilon, and other partners like Live Intent, a bunch of other partners that are in pipeline. So what happens when they work with InMobi, with our solution, they're able to maximize their inventory or their audiences, and then they're able to make it addressable. So that really helps the publishers to try and address some of the new issues they have been facing. And we've got a couple of publisher examples as case studies that we have highlighted. And there's a lot of progress on that side that has happened. In fact, in US market, we're seeing some of these publishers are seeing almost 150% jump in their ECPMs as compared to what they were getting before adopting the solution. On the fill rates also on iOS, we're seeing more than 70-75% fill rate increase after adoption of this. So there's tons of benefit publishers have been able to get by leveraging these solutions that we're working with them on.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think, like you said, when everything was mushrooming and basically solving for the demand side, this seemed like a great move to actually just help aggregate everything and let publishers really manage their consent, plus also look at a bunch of the inventory maximization at their end. So seems like a great move. Now, we've talked about the consumer, the advertiser, and basically the publisher as well, so the ecosystem as a whole. But primarily when it comes to advertisers, right, who are actually spending money today, what are some sort of investments that you are seeing coming out from their kitty? Because we've heard a bunch of things that Xiaofeng mentioned about contextual targeting, about first-party data, etc. But what is it that you are seeing is already happening and is here for the long term?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Rajesh. And the reason I say that is it gives me an opportunity to highlight some of the good work, and not just good work, amazing work that the advertiser side partners that we work with have been able to do. So I think the advertising ecosystem or the brands and our agency partners have been extremely innovative when they work with us. We've been able to craft very unique solutions to solve for this problem. I'll give you a couple of examples, and most of these are available as published case studies, approved case studies on various channels, our channels as well as our social handles. So the people who are plugged into the webinar can go through them. But I'll briefly mention some examples. So we've had a beautiful case study with Unilever Breeze in Philippines, where they were able to leverage a research platform called Pulse, which is also InMobi's proprietary and an industry first solution for collecting first party signals from the market. So they were able to engage with consumers at a very early stage in identifying why audiences behave in a certain way or respond in a different way to their liquid detergent, which is Breeze in this case. And they were able to identify which are the price conscious audiences versus early adopters versus laggards, or some perceptions that consumers had. Based on that insight that they collected from first party engagement with consumers, they were able to craft, firstly, generate audiences for example, lookalike audiences and expand those audiences and then address them with very unique messaging to change those perceptions. So that is one example. The other one was Rexona in Indonesia, where again, by connecting with first-party data, connecting with consumers, they were able to create seed audiences out of that, and then expand them into lookalike audiences and engage again. Similarly, there are others like you win in Philippines, and we've got Godrej in India that enrich their audiences. They had some information about the first party, about their consumers, and they work with InMobi or in India, our InMobi teams, and they enriched with additional trades, built a deeper understanding about who Godrej's consumers are, and then drive better messaging, creative targeting, and campaign. So there's a bunch of examples. I think I would encourage people on the call to go through some of these case studies on our website as well.
Awesome. So first party data in many shapes and forms is basically the biggest investment that's happening right now. And yeah, I mean, like, I know identity is not solved yet, but I think that's the big thing to do. And I remember actually David Porter, who just recently retired from Unilever as well, mentioning that this is one unique solution, innovative solution, but the magic of it is it's scalable. And we're seeing that in your examples of Philippines, India, Indonesia. So really great to hear a bunch of those success stories as well. Great, Rishi. So my last question to you today will be, as the InMobi group today, which has a bunch of advertising platforms and consumer platforms, how are you preparing to enable the ecosystem to build a unified view of the consumer?
Sure. Rajesh, so we are a global platform, and we've been working across different markets ever since the GDPR regulations came, about 6-7 years ago, etc. So we understand the identity and audiences solutions a lot better. But we're working in various ways. But I want to highlight one part around building a single view of the consumer, that now we have Glance, right? And Glance is an innovative consumer proposition that sits on their lock screens. It's very, very unique proposition. It has already scaled. We've got about 250 million unique users across India and Southeast Asia already, and we are expanding globally. We've made announcements of expansion across the globe. We also have a bunch of other O&O properties that sit on the lock screens of the consumers. There are apps that sit on the lock screen. So we are able to understand consumers' journey on their smartphones a lot better. We also work with ecosystem partners and industry bodies like IAB to define and enable the right framework for identity solutions. And this framework does not just, it goes beyond solving for identity. It also helps solve for the measurement and attribution aspects of the identity. So we're working across various partners, and we're investing heavily into the consumer space. So there's a lot of work going on towards that.
Awesome. That's great, Rishi. It really was lovely to hear all the insights and to actually reminisce a bunch of the stuff that InMobi has always been ahead in the ad tech world in the past 2 years. Thanks a lot, Rishi. It was lovely having you over.
Thank you, Rajesh. Great chatting with you. Thanks a lot for having me. Bye-bye.